You know what time it is? It's time for KP's Video News. That's right, KP's Video News, y'all. KP's Video News.
That's right, it's time for KP's Video News. And I'm coming to you today with some history here because, you know, you got a lot of people out there and they're out there celebrating, and it's like Memorial Day, but 99.9% of the people out there do not know the real truth about Memorial Day or even how Memorial Day started and how it even got started. So today I'm going to give you this history about Memorial Day, and it may or it may not shock you. And then at the end I'll make a comment about that. Okay, here we go. Union General John Logan is often credited with founding Memorial Day, the commander-in-chief of a Union veterans organization called the Grand Army of the Republic. Logan issued a decree establishing what was then named Decoration Day on May 5th, 1868, declaring it designated for the purpose of strewing flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of the country during the late rebellion and during the Civil War, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet, churchyard in the land. Today, cities across the North and the South claim credit for establishing the first Decoration Day, from Macon, Georgia to Richmond, Virginia to Carbondale, Illinois. Yet, a key story of the holiday has been nearly erased from public memory and most official accounts, including that offered by the Department of Veterans Affairs. During the spring of 1865, African American and in Charleston, South Carolina, most of them former slaves, held a series of memorials and rituals to honor unnamed fallen soldiers and boldly celebrate the struggle against slavery. One of the largest such events took place on May 1st of that year. It's 1865 on May 1st, but had been largely forgotten until David Blight, a history professor at Yale University, found records at a Harvard archive. In a New York Times article published in 2011, Blight described the scene. While it is difficult to pinpoint the precise birthplace of the holiday, it is fair to say that ceremonies like the following are largely erased from the American narrative of Memorial Day. During the final year of the war, the Confederates had converted the city's Washington race course and jockey club into an outdoor prison. Union captives were kept in horrible conditions in the interior of the track. At least 257 died of disease and were hastily buried in mass graves behind the grandstand. After the Confederate evacuation of Charleston, black workmen went to the site, reburied the Union dead properly, and built a high fence around the cemetery. They whitewashed the fence and built an archway over an entrance on which they inscribed the words, "Martyrs of the Race Course." The symbolic power of this low country planter aristocracy's bastion was not the last on the free people, who then, in cooperation with white missionaries and teachers, staged a parade of 10,000 on the track. A New York Tribune correspondent witnessed the event, describing a procession of friends and mourners as South Carolina and the United States never saw before. The procession was led by 3,000 black school children carrying armloads of roses and singing the Union marching song, John Brown's Body. Several hundred black women followed with baskets of flowers, wreaths, and crosses. Then came black men marching in cadence, followed by contingents of Union infantrymen. With the cemetery enclosure of black children's choir singing "We Rally Around the Flag" and the Star-Spangled Banner, and spirituals before a series of black ministers read from the Bible. After the dedication, the crowd dispersed into the infield and did what many of us do on Memorial Day: enjoy picnics, listen to speeches, and watch soldiers drill. Among the full brigade of Union infantrymen participating was the famous 54th. And sidebar, if you remember watching the movie, what was the name of the movie that had Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson and all those guys in it? They called themselves the Fighting 54th. That was the 54th Massachusetts and the 34th and 104th United States Colored Troops, who performed a special double column march around the gravesite. The story of Memorial Day, also reported by Victoria Mass of Vox, was not merely excluded from the history books, but appears to have been actively suppressed. The park where the race course prison camp once stood was eventually named Hampton Park after the Confederate General Wade Hampton, who became South Carolina's governor following the war. In 1966, former President Lyndon Johnson declared Waterloo, New York, to have to be the official place of Memorial Day. Then in 1971, Congress established Memorial Day as an official federal holiday to honor all Americans who have fallen in the United States wars. In an article published in 2013, said they used these official declarations as well as a decree issued by Logan to bolster his argument that African Americans in Charleston probably should not be credited for establishing the holiday. He further noted that numerous other towns and cities claim to have created the first ceremonies. Yet, reasoning fails to account for the systematic and proven appropriation, erasure, and distortion of African American history by presidents, lawmakers, generals, and scholars alike. The fact that the role of African Americans is missing from the official record is precisely the problem. At the very least, the contribution of black people in Charleston has been erased from the public narrative of Memorial Day and deserves to be recognized. World War II veteran Howard Zinn argued in 1976 that the holiday has since become an uncritical celebration of war, making Memorial Day should be a day for putting flowers on graves and planting trees, he wrote. Also for destroying the weapons of death that endanger us more than they protect us, that waste our resources and threaten our children and our grandchildren. Yet, Memorial Day has other troubling modern day manifestations. While today, while Confederate symbols across the United States are increasingly rejected as racist, Civil War reenactors gather in Charleston for a public ceremony held shortly after Memorial Day to honor the Confederacy on the anniversary of General Stonewall Jackson's death in 1863. The ceremony is slated to take place next weekend, even after last summer's and a few summers ago, white supremacist massacre at Charleston Emmanuel African Methodist Church, and 9 African Americans were slaughtered. Charleston officials have taken some small steps towards recognizing the city's African American history. Following a community campaign, the city of Charleston finally held its first formal commemorative of the African American roots of Memorial Day in 2010. And the following year, it established a plaque. Yet, the history of former slaves' efforts to give the Union dead a proper burial is missing from the park's official history, made available online by Parks Conservancy. And Dot Scott, president of the Charleston branch of the NAACP, told Alton that many of the issues we have around race are based on the fact that these stories have not been told. It sends the message that the contributions of African Americans are not valued and respected. So just having said that and having read that, and I'm going to make sure I post up the links so you can read it for yourself, and you can do your own research about the true history of Memorial Day, which was in fact created by black soldiers and by black people that were placing memorials on because they were happy that they had, the war was over, they had been been basically freed from the tyranny of the Civil War. They lost a lot of people, a lot of black people that still, right to this day, a lot of those black soldiers have not been recognized. And those, I must say, did fight on both sides, the Union and Confederate. However, this whole thing of Memorial Day, and if you go out there and you see, they flying this and they flying that, so we as a people must understand that African American history in the United States has been erased and at the least suppressed to almost being non-existent. And that's why we must tell the truth, and we must basically go out and we must celebrate ourselves. And having said that, this Memorial Day, I'm going to celebrate all those black soldiers that lost their lives and fought and died to free black people from slavery, and all those other black people that fought not only in the Civil War but in World War I. My uncles fought in World War I. I had other relatives that fought in World War II. My father fought in the Korean War. I had other relatives that fought during Vietnam. And, some of my younger relatives now, one of my cousin's sons that had been in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, black soldiers in the United States have fought in every major war. That's right. One of my other cousins that recently passed away was part of the Grenada invasion. And so I salute all of you black soldiers, all you soldiers, period. I'm not just going to say black. I'm going to say all you soldiers that are being celebrated on this Memorial Day, and especially my black brothers that died for so I can be free to do this show on here. Peace.